The moment a clot seals an artery deep in your brain, a clock starts, and it is merciless. In a typical large stroke, every minute that artery stays blocked, around 1.9 million neurons die. Your brain ages roughly 3.5 years for every hour you wait. But the part almost nobody pictures is the shape of the damage. Right next to the tissue that is already gone sits a ring of brain that is stunned, silent, and still alive. That ring has a name, the penumbra. Picture the blocked territory as a target. Dead center, where flow has collapsed almost completely, is the core. Those cells lose power in minutes and die where they stand. But at the edges, other vessels are still leaking a trickle of blood in from the sides. It is not enough to let those neurons work, so they go quiet, which is why a stroke can steal speech or movement so fast. It is just enough to keep them from dying yet. That silent, salvageable rim is the whole reason a stroke is an emergency instead of a verdict. So why does that clock run so fast for one person and so slow for another? The answer is the brain's backup plumbing. At the base of the brain, the main arteries are joined in a ring, so if one route closes, blood can sometimes reroute in from a neighbor. Add the fine web of vessels stitched across the brain's surface, and you get the collaterals, detours that keep the penumbra barely fed. Strong detours, and the core stays small and grows slowly. Weak detours, and the core swallows the penumbra fast. That is why 1.9 million a minute is an average, not a promise. Every brain keeps its own time. Now zoom all the way in, down to a single neuron at the edge of the core, and watch why it actually dies. Because it is not the clot that kills the cell. The cell, in a sense, destroys itself. Every second, this neuron burns energy just to stay ready. It runs tiny pumps that push sodium out and pull potassium in, holding a charge across its membrane like a loaded spring. All of that runs on a fuel called ATP, and ATP is made from oxygen and glucose the blood delivers. Cut the blood, and within seconds, the fuel gauge starts falling. The pumps slow, then stall. Sodium floods in, the charge collapses, and the neuron can no longer hold itself in balance. Then comes the dangerous part. The dying cell dumps a flood of glutamate, its main go signal, into the gap between neurons, and the pumps that normally mop glutamate back up have no power left to do it. That glutamate jams open the doorways it was only ever meant to knock on. Channels that should flicker for a fraction of a second are now stuck wide, and calcium comes pouring through. Inside a healthy cell, calcium is a messenger, kept scarce on purpose. In these amounts, it stops being a message and becomes a demolition order. It switches on enzymes that chew through the cell's own scaffolding, its membranes, even its DNA. The neuron digests itself from the inside. Biologists call this excitotoxicity, death by too much signal. Here is the difference between the two zones. In the core, where the blood is almost fully cut, this happens fast and all at once. The cells swell and rupture, a quick, messy collapse. In the penumbra, with that trickle of backup flow, the same cascade runs in slow motion. Those cells are teetering on the edge for minutes, sometimes hours. And that slow motion death is exactly the window doctors are racing against. So how do you stop it? You give the penumbra back its blood before the cascade finishes. Reopen the artery, and oxygen and glucose come flooding back. The fuel gauges refill, the pumps restart, the glutamate gets cleared, the calcium alarm shuts off, and the tissue that was teetering freezes right where it stood. There are two ways to open that artery. One is a drug that dissolves the clot chemically. The other is a thin tube threaded up through the blood vessels to physically grab the clot and pull it out. The names on those clot-dissolving drugs are alteplase and tenecteplase, and this is where the story is genuinely current. In early 2026, updated national stroke guidelines put tenecteplase on equal footing with the older standard, and just as important, they leaned harder on brain scans to decide who can still be helped, in some cases many hours after symptoms began. Because the real clock was never just the time on the wall. It is how much living penumbra a scan can still see. Tissue time, not just wall time. Two things get confused with a stroke, and clearing them up shows what a stroke really is. The first, a stroke is not a heart attack. A heart attack is a blocked pipe starving heart muscle. A stroke is that same kind of blockage, but starving the brain, a different organ, and a very different way of dying, because heart muscle never runs that glutamate and calcium self-destruct. Cardiac arrest is different again. There, the heart's electrical rhythm fails, and the pump simply stops. And the two organs are linked. When the heart flutters out of rhythm, a condition called atrial fibrillation, blood can pool and clot inside it, and that clot can break loose, ride up the arteries, and lodge in the brain. A heart problem, throwing a stroke. The second confusion matters even more because it changes the treatment. Not every stroke is a clot. About 7 in 8 are a blocked vessel, the story we have been telling. But the rest are the opposite. A vessel bursts and bleeds into the brain, often announced by a sudden, worst-ever headache. Now picture the danger. The clot-busting drug that rescues a blocked vessel stroke would pour fuel on a bleeding one. That is why the emergency room scans the brain before treating anything. The first job is not to treat the stroke. It is to find out which stroke it is. This is where the famous warning signs come from. The face that droops on one side. The arm that drifts down. The words that come out slurred. A sudden loss of balance or vision. Those signs exist for one reason. Because everything you just watched is already running. They are not a checklist to diagnose yourself at home. They are the outside of a clock that is ticking on the inside. So if they appear, suddenly, in yourself or someone near you, the move is simple. Call emergency services immediately, because minutes are neurons. And if you were ever worried about your own health, that is a conversation for a real doctor, not a video. A stroke feels like a bolt from nowhere. But under the skin, it is something almost mechanical. A sealed pipe, a dying center, and a ring of brain holding its breath, waiting to see if the blood comes back in time. That ring is the reason speed matters, and the reason a stroke, caught fast enough, does not have to be the end of the story.